The Ottomans, an empire lasting 600 years, consisting of 36 sultans, 28 caliphs, covering 3 continents, and the last great Islamic empire the world has ever seen. Follow me, the Tariq Trekker, as I travel around northwest Turkey, visiting all 4 of the key main Ottoman capitals while narrating to you the long history of this great empire, starting with the now famous Ertugrul and ending with the infamous Ataturk. If that interests you, keep watching. I'm going to start with a misconception. Many people think that Turks come from Turkey. It sounds logical, but it's not quite true. If you go back 1,000 years ago, this land was mainly inhabited by people who were of a Greek ethnicity, and the land used to be called Asia Minor or Anatolia. They were part of the Byzantine Roman Empire, and their capital was this city, Constantinople. Then, 1,000 years ago, from their ancestral homelands in Central Asia, some Turks, known as Seljuk Turks, started to migrate west, and in doing so they created a big empire called the Great Seljuk Empire, which even came to control the Abbasid Caliphate based in Baghdad. Their empire was so big, it bordered the Byzantine Empire in eastern Anatolia, and that's when some Turks started raiding into Anatolia and started to annoy the Byzantine Emperor here in Constantinople. The Byzantine Emperor had had enough of these Turks in the eastern border regions causing some problems and wanted to finish this issue once and for all, so he raised a large army and marched east to meet them. The Sultan of the Great Seljuk Empire, Alp Arslan, heard about this. He raised his army and marched northwest, and the two would meet in a famous battle in the year 1071 called the Battle of Manzikert, and it was very significant because not only was it a great victory for the Seljuks, they'd captured the Byzantine emperor, and for the first time a Muslim empire was able to take huge swathes of land in eastern Anatolia, something that the previous Umayyad Caliphate and the previous Abbasid Caliphate had failed to do. Because of this land being now open to Islam, many Turkic tribes started to migrate into Anatolia and inhabit it. As a result of Anatolia being opened up to Islam, many Turks started to migrate into it and settle down, and when they did, they found a land which was very similar to their ancestral homelands in Central Asia, so they felt quite at home. They started to build mosques, they started to marry with the local Greeks, and the local Greeks started to learn Turkish so they could communicate and trade with the Turks who had moved in. At the same time, the churches in central Anatolia had now been cut off from Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire, so they weren't really maintained, and as a result less people started to frequent them, and many Greeks started to convert to Islam. So it was the Seljuk Turks, with their great victory at Manzikert in the year 1071, which allowed Greek, Christian, Orthodox Asia Minor to be transformed into Turkish Islamic Anatolia over a period of about 130 years. But just like all empires, the Great Seljuk Empire would break up into many fragments. One fragment remained in Anatolia, and that was the Sultanate of Rum, which had its capital in southern Anatolia in Konya. Anatolia had always been at the center of the known world, and because of that, events that would occur to the east of it and to the west of it would always have a profound effect on it itself. So in the early 1200s, 2 events occurred, one in the east and one in the west, which would change the fate of Anatolia forever. As for the first one, which occurred from the west, that was in 1204, when Catholic, Latin, Western European crusaders decided they wanted to go on another crusade, the fourth crusade, and attack Jerusalem. However, on the way, they decided to stop off at Constantinople. And in the end, they didn't manage to get to Jerusalem because they decided that they would just sack the city of Constantinople itself. You see, Constantinople was the Orthodox Greek Empire, and the Orthodox and the Catholic had a huge dislike for one another, and they'd excommunicated each other, they'd made takfir upon each other, so there was no love loss. So in 1204, Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire was significantly weakened. Then, also in the early 1200s, except in the east, a certain Genghis Khan launched his attempt to try and conquer the world. He was moving west with hundreds of thousands of Mongol soldiers on horseback, killing people, pillaging lands, destroying villages, raping women, and there was fear in everybody. So many people from Central Asia started to migrate. One tribe which decided to migrate was a tribe called the Kai tribe, and they were led by a man called Ertugrul. You may have heard of him, but about 10 years ago, no one knew of him. But now, he might just be the most famous Turk there's ever been. He led his tribe and they moved from Central Asia to Persia through to the Middle East, and they ended up in Anatolia, settling down in a place called Sorut in the northwest. Ertugrul and the Kai tribe went into the service of Sultan Qayqubad, who was the leader of the Sultanate of Rum in Konya, and he was very impressed with their warrior-like fighting skills, so he granted them some land in northwest Anatolia, here in Sorut, and it was bordering the Byzantine Empire. It was here where the Kai tribe lived in their typical semi-nomadic Turkmen lifestyle, in big mobile tents operating as horse archers in a dangerous neighborhood. The Byzantine Empire was close, the Mongols were trying to enter the area, and crusaders were always passing close by. Not much is known about Ertugrul for sure. However, what we do know is that he had a son who turned out to be slightly famous. Ertugrul led the Kai tribe for 40 years until his death in the year 1281, where he was succeeded by his son in leading the tribe. In the Turkish language, the word bey means prince or ruler, and the word beylik means principality. And in the late 1200s, the Sultanate of Rum started to break up, and many different tribal Turkic leaders started to proclaim their independence from them. And one Friday afternoon in the year 1299, the man who's buried in this tomb behind me, called Dursun Faki, stood up to give a Friday Juma khutbah, and in it he declared that the Kai tribe was now an independent principality, separate from the Sultanate of Rum, and that Usman Ghazi was now going to be the bey of this beylik. So for the first time in the history of his family lineage, one of them had become an independent ruler. So what do we need to know about Usman Ghazi? Well, three main things. Number one, what is Ghazi? What does Ghazi mean? Number two, he was a Turk. And number three, he was a Muslim. What we now need to appreciate is how these three factors, being Ghazi, being Turk and being Muslim, made Usman the right person, in the right place, at the right time. The word Ghazi in Turkish comes from the Arabic Ghazi, and it means warrior. And in the neighborhood that Osman lived in, where there was Mongols trying to enter the area, Byzantine Empire close by, and loads of other Turkic beyliks that were hostile, crusaders coming through, you had to be a warrior. If you weren't a warrior, you and your people would get eaten alive. The second thing, he was a Turk. And Turks were a semi-nomadic people. They weren't city dwellers who enjoyed luxuries and all the amenities of life. They lived in difficulty in the countryside, which meant they were a tough people. So when tough people are tasked with a difficult thing to accomplish, generally they will be the ones who will be able to do it not the city dwellers who just want to just sit and relax. The second thing about being semi-nomadic, it means that you are mobile. That means the enemy does not know where you are. You can move very fast. They don't know where you are, but you know where they are because they're always stationary in one place. Lastly, he was a Muslim, a religion where defense of the faith is part and parcel of it, and when the opportunity arises, expansion is also part of it as well. So these three things, being Ghazi, being Turk, being Muslim, meant that Usman Ghazi was the perfect person in the perfect time at the perfect place. Firstly, other Turkic tribes saw the success of Osman's beylik and they started to flock to his cause, and in doing so they became Osmanli. Osmanli means people of Osman, and Osmanli translates into English as Ottomans. And Osman would go to war with these other Turkic tribes, and he would share the spoils of war with them, and he would grant them land if they provided him with fighters. So his population was starting to get bigger, his fighting force was going to get stronger, and his beylik was expanding. The empire that was losing out to this new emerging Ottoman beylik was that of the Byzantine Empire situated in Constantinople. So they decided they couldn't just sit and watch, they had to take action. The Byzantines would use three tactics to try and deal with Osman, the leader of this small but significant beylik. The first was to try and assassinate him. They tried to lure him into a town where they would be waiting for him, and then they could kill him. But he had informers who told him of the plot, and so it didn't work. The second tactic they tried to use was try to ally with an enemy of the Turks of Anatolia, which was the Mongol Ilkhanate Empire, which was based in Persia and Iraq. To try and make an allegiance with them, they sent a Byzantine princess over to marry the Mongol ruler. The Mongol ruler took the princess, but he didn't make any allegiance with them. And lastly, they imported Catholic mercenaries from places like Genoa and Catalonia to send into the countryside of northwest Anatolia to attack Osman. But Osman was clever. He knew that these people were seasoned knights, so he withdrew. And instead of fighting Turks, the Catholic mercenaries ended up looting, killing and pillaging Greek Orthodox towns in northwest Anatolia, which really distanced the Greek population of the area from the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. And the situation was ripe for a new leader to come and win their hearts and minds. And I wonder who that could have been. Every attempt of the Byzantine Empire to curtail the activities of Osman had failed, and it was as if God was on his side. Speaking of God, Osman was a very, very religious man, and in his circle of advisors he kept many religious scholars. One of them was this man, Sheikh Edebali, who's buried in this tomb behind me. One night Osman had a dream, and the moon emanated from the chest of Sheikh Edebali and it migrated into the chest of Osman. Suddenly a tree grew out very high and its branches spread far and wide. The next day Osman asked Sheikh Edebali about the dream and asked him to interpret it, and he was told that you will have a lineage, you will have a family tree with an empire which encompasses 3 continents. Was God on his side? Would the dream become a reality? Well, Sheikh Edebali certainly thought so, because very shortly afterwards he married his daughter to Osman to make sure that his family tree was always linked to Osman's family tree, and their family tree would be the one which had an empire which covered 3 continents. Between 1309 and 1321, Usman Ghazi, leading his troops on horseback, managed to capture some small towns in the surroundings of Surut, Towns like Yeni Sahir and Eski Sahir. However, what he really needed to put his beylik on the map would be to capture a major city. And in 1321, he decided to besiege this city called Bursa. The only problem was he was now getting very old, so he deputized a lot of the command to his son, who was called Orhan. Now, this siege was no normal siege because the Ottomans did not have any cannons. So what they had to do was just surround the city and starve them out, and it took nearly 4 years. But in the end, they were successful. But the reason why they were successful is because they were Turkic. People who didn't need to live in a city. They were more happy to camp outside in the countryside while they were enjoying life and having all the luxuries inside the city. The only problem was that during the siege, Usman Ghazi died. He'd been fighting the Byzantine Empire for 40 years, but he had one request, and that was, once the city is taken, bury me within the city walls. Two decisions which Osman made at the end of his life really do show the mentality of the man, and probably had a great effect on successive Ottoman rulers for generations to come. The first decision was where to be buried. Most people want to be buried in the place where they've lived most of their life, or close to their loved ones who've already passed away. His father was buried in Bursa, and Osman lived most of his life in Sughut. Yet he didn't decide to be buried there. He decided to be buried over here in Bursa. The question is, why would you do that? And I personally think that the reason is Osman was not someone who would dwell on the past and where someone has come from. Rather, he would be a man looking forward to where people are going to go, where you want to be, and your future achievements. And his achievement was trying to take the city of Bursa and expand the Ottoman beylik. And I'm pretty sure that this decision to be buried here in Bursa would have had a great effect on successive Ottoman rulers. The second important decision that he made right at the end of his life was that of who should be his successor. He had two sons. Ala-ad-Din was the older one, who was more of an intellectual and a bureaucrat, and the younger one was Orhan, who was more in the mold of a Ghazi warrior, and he chose Orhan, the one who was a Ghazi warrior. And so again, this kind of sets a precedent with successive Ottoman rulers as to what is expected of you. You should be someone who's on the battlefield. You should be someone who is fighting to expand the boundaries of our new beylik. And if you press the bell button and subscribe, I'm pretty sure you're going to see this in the upcoming episodes in my series. But before Osman died, he had some key advice for Orhan. He said, "Son, be careful about the religious issues before all other duties. The religious precepts build a strong state. Do not give religious duties to careless, faithless or sinful men, because the one without fear of God the Creator is not afraid of the created. The one committing a great sin and continuing to do so cannot be loyal. A loyal person is loyal to the Prophet's true tradition and does not transgress the Sharia. Avoid cruelty and superstition, and remove the people who encourage cruelty and superstition from your state. Always widen the state by struggling militarily in the path of God, because if campaigns are not held for a long time, deficiencies appear in soldiers and in the knowledge, information and measure of commanders. Save the treasury and try to increase the state stock. Within the boundaries of the Sharia, be content and concentrate on your needs and your necessities, and do not squander your wealth. Do not be proud of your soldiers and your weapons, because they are mere intermediaries in the way of God. Protect the statesmen working in God's way. After their death, care about their families and answer their needs. Give your kind hand to the deserving people. Protect military officials, scholars, virtuous men, artists, literary men, as they are the power of the state structure. Treat them with kindness and show honor to them. Take lesson from me, as I came to this place as a weak leader, and I reached these high heights with the help of God, although I did not deserve it. Follow me and protect Deen-e Muhammadi, the religion of Muhammad, and the believers,
and also your followers. Respect the rights of God and the rights of His servants. Do not hesitate to advise your successors in this way.
Usman Ghazi mentioned many things in his advice to his son, but if you were paying close attention, you would have noticed that he mentioned deen, religion, and government and state quite a lot, and often he linked the two together. Religion in Arabic and Turkish is called deen, and in Turkish the state is called devlet. So this was the beginning of an Ottoman Islamic concept known as din-e devlet, whereby Osman Ghazi and his successive Ottoman rulers saw the two of them as a symbiotic relationship, one requiring the other for either of them to function properly. And without having this symbiotic relationship, without them being together, society wouldn't function properly, which is in stark contrast to secularism. The second theme to his advice that he gave to his son were the people that he mentioned. So he mentioned a lot about people who would fight with him, people who were warriors, and he held these people in high regard, and he asked them to always be with them and look after them. And he also mentioned religious scholars and other people who were intellectuals who brought a lot to the table. And at the end he said, do not hesitate to advise your successors in this way. So in other words, he's talking about the lineage from his family who are going to rule. This was the beginning of the three major Ottoman institutions that would hold the Ottoman Empire together for the next 500 to 600 years. And these three institutions can be classified as, number one, the House of Usman, which would be called the executive. The second would be the military, in Turkish the askeriya, and also in Arabic. And then the third would be the ilmiya, which is the Muslim scholars, the Grand Viziers and the other intellectuals. And as you will see if you watch the rest of my series, these three institutions were always interacting with each other. When they interacted well, the Ottoman Empire was fine. When they did not interact well, the Ottoman Empire had problems. So make sure you subscribe and press the bell button, and you'll find out what happens. Usman Ghazi had created three things. Number one, a landmass. Number two, a philosophy of how an Islamic society should be run. And thirdly, it created an example of a character for successive Ottoman rulers to follow. And he'd shown this by the force of his own action and personality. The only question is, would Orhan listen to the advice of his father? Or would Orhan be worse than his father, or would Orhan be greater than his father? And how would Orhan deal with ruling a major urban center now that they've taken Bursa? To find out, make sure you watch my next episode on the history of the Ottomans from Ertugrul to Ataturk. Salam.